Hello everybody and welcome to Decoding the WSL, the podcast dedicated to the stats and facts in the WSL. Today we're looking ahead to game week 2. There's Palace, the newbies, against champions Chelsea, Matt Beard's going back to his former side and Brighton look to continue winning ways. I'm going to give you all the numbers you need for the weekend's games. I'm your host, Sam Biccarino. Yes, hello listener, thank you for joining me. It is currently Wednesday, the 25th of September, although it might be slightly later in the week by the time that you're listening to this. It is about the right time to start looking ahead to game week 2. WSL got back underway last weekend, and it's only been 3 days since the last match, and it's only 2 days to the next one. That feels good, doesn't it, to have so much football flying at us quick. We're going to take a look through each of the matches that are coming up this weekend, and we're going to start with the Friday night under the lights. Yes, Friday night sees the start of game week 2 with the newbies Palace hosting the champions Chelsea. That is 7:30 live on Sky Sports. Obviously Palace don't have, any WSL experience, but they did meet Chelsea back in the FA Cup in February this year. Chelsea ran out 1-0 victors. It was a pretty fair result. Chelsea did have a lot of the possession, 72%, but Palace restricted them to just 3 shots on target. Here's an interesting stat you might not expect, that Palace had more possession than Chelsea last weekend. They had 48% to Chelsea's 47%. Considering Chelsea won their match 1-0 and Palace got thrashed 4-0, you probably expect that to be that Chelsea had far more. But no, I think that kind of shows the way that these two teams have played in that opening set of fixtures. Chelsea's win puts them on a streak of 4 WSL clean sheets in a row, which I think Palace are going to struggle this weekend to do anything about that. Something interesting that I have seen this afternoon, a question that I was struggling to find the answer to be honest, but Emma Sanders on X has answered that for us, that Brooke Aston, after her red card against Spurs, will serve her ban against Chelsea this weekend, which I wasn't sure she would do because both her and Lexi Potter are on loan from Chelsea and are therefore not allowed to play in this game anyway. So I didn't know if Brooke Aston's red card would have to be served for the following game, but no, it seems that she'll be back for their 3rd WSL match. Neither team had that many interesting stats from the weekend, to be honest. Chelsea, in a very close game, 1-1 with Villa. Nothing really stands out that much when it's a game that close. And then Palace, there were a few standout stats, but none of them are positive, so I don't like to dwell on them too much if I don't need to. In terms of how I think the match will go on Friday night, Chelsea will probably not be challenged quite as much as they were against Villa. I think they'll have a lot of the possession, probably 60-70%. They'll probably dominate in the air. I think their wingers will cause havoc for Palace. Palace will probably try and sit back and not necessarily play for a 0-0, but at least not concede too many goals. But I think Chelsea's quality will be too much, and I reckon Chelsea will be winning by half-time. Palace will either have to risk it or continue just to sit back. And I think it's going to be a Chelsea win, and I'm actually going to predict back-to-back 4-0 losses for Crystal Palace at the start of the season. Chelsea 2-0 in each half, runaway winners. Then everyone gets a nice break on Saturday, isn't that nice? And we're back to the WSL on Sunday, kicking things off at Man City as they host league leaders Brighton. 12:30 will be live on BBC iPlayer. Nikita Paris will be visiting her former side. She had 51 goal involvements in 60 appearances over 2 seasons at Man City. She'll be coming with the league leaders, I presume, and looking to build on their fantastic start to the season with that 4-0 win over Everton. Kiko Saika getting a hat-trick in that game, and a hat-trick with just 4 shots on target, which is very impressive. I'm sure, however, Man City will be putting up a fight. They only got 1 point from their opening game, but I don't think many teams are going to go away to the Emirates this season and come away with all 3 points. Alex Greenwood will almost no doubt be one of their main players. She actually had the most touches in the whole of the WSL last weekend with 127 in a 90-minute game. Yamashita, in goal for Man City, got 77. She was the most for a goalkeeper. It'll be interesting to see what happens with their goalkeeping scenario. Obviously, as I record, listener, on Wednesday, early evening. We don't know how Man City have got on in their Champions League game. We don't know who's played. But Kiara Keating will be feeling very aggrieved if she's not played either of the Champions League qualifiers or the first 2 games of the season. So if she doesn't play on the evening game for Man City against Paris, I think you can expect to be playing in this game. Elsewhere, looking at some of the stats, Viv Miedema obviously made her debut for Man City in quite a big game against her former side, Arsenal. She actually had the most goal-creating actions in the league, or joint most anyway, and the second most shot-creating actions with 6. If you look at the stats, a lot of those were for herself, but nevertheless, she's still helping the team get shots away in, some actions that lead to goals. I mentioned Kiko Saika already, and I'm going to mention her again alongside Jess Park, because they were the 2 players that had the most passes into the box last weekend with 3 each. You can see for both teams and both of those players, that is going to be the way they're going to try and play this season. They're not going to be whacking long balls necessarily. Man City might be putting some crosses in, but a lot of their game is going to be making those passes into the box rather than dribbling it through or rather than taking shots from distance. A couple of things from Man City's press conference today. So Alexandri, who I thought was fantastic on Sunday, I thought she was one of the players of the game, certainly one of the top 3. She was asked about interest that she's had from Barcelona, and I'll let you go and find the quote yourself, but it very much gave the impression that her contract is up at the end of the season, and if nothing's done about it, then why wouldn't she go to Barcelona? Back to her native Spain, of course. That would be a huge miss for Man City if that does go ahead. They've obviously got Naomi Lazell. That may be long-term planning from Man City if they know that Alexandri is going to leave, but Alexandri is a top player, and alongside Alex Greenwood, I think they're potentially the best centre-back partnership in the league. So to lose one of those, even with Naomi Lazell coming through, that would be a big loss if that does come to fruition. One positive thing for Man City, though, that we heard from the press conference today from Gareth Taylor is that Jill Roord is expected to be back at the weekend. He's expecting her to be back in the squad, probably not going to start, but will get some minutes. I said in a previous episode that I think if Jill Roord was around all season last year, Man City would have won the league, and not just on goal difference, but I think she'd have been the difference in some of those games where they dropped points. So her being back, I think, is going to be a massive boost to the team. Taking a look at some of their head-to-head records, Brighton have scored in their last 5 games against City, even though they have lost 4 of those games. But interesting nonetheless that although, like I say, City have won 4 of those last 5, they're letting in goals in all of them. Same fixture last season at Man City, back in November of 2023, was quite interesting. City had 35 shots, 66% possession, but that was one of the 5 that they lost. City 0, Brighton 1. A late goal from Lee Min off the bench won the game for the Seagulls. Personally, I don't think that's going to be replicated this weekend. I think Brighton, if they can get the first goal, it's probably going to come from a counter-attack if it does come, and they could then try and sit back and hold that lead and keep Man City out. But I don't think after a 4-0 win the previous weekend, they're going to want to do that. And Man City are going to be wary. They're going to be wary of a team that has just won 4-0 in their previous game. Yes, it was against an Everton team that didn't look too convincing, but you've still got a team in Brighton that looked very convincing themselves. So Man City aren't going to want to do any sort of sitting back. They're going to want to go and take the game to Brighton. To be honest, I think their individual quality will be enough to get them through. Brighton's still a very good side. I can see them getting a goal, but I think it'll be following a similar trend of the last few games where both teams will score but City will win. I'm going to go for a 3-1 City victory. On to the 2 o'clock game on Sunday, and it is the first of the 4 YouTube games. It is Sunday 2 p.m, as I say. It is Everton against Man United. Grace Clinton and Gabby George going back to their former club, but a player that won't be there is Aurora Galley. Everton this morning confirming that she has suffered an ACL injury, which I think was feared after the way she went down, the way she walked off last weekend. That's going to be a big loss for Everton. She's a big player for them. She's one of their more important players, one of their more skilled players, and one of their more influential players. Certainly was last season. And until she went off at the weekend, the stats told exactly the same story. However, elsewhere on the pitch, Elizabeth Turland will most likely be starting and wanting to open her Manchester United account. I was very surprised that she didn't manage to score last weekend against a West Ham team that I didn't think looked very convincing. And to be honest, the worst part of all of it was that I captained Turland in my fantasy team and she still let me down. But what can you do? That is the joys of fantasy, isn't it? That's why we love it. Going through some of the stats from the game, Lisa Nielsen, I'm going to touch on her first because she had the joint most passes into the box in the WSL last weekend with 3 and the second most interceptions with 4. So showing that she's doing her defensive work, but also doing her attacking work as well, creating for other players on her team. A bit further back, I want to talk about Millie Turner because there's a stat that you would expect your sort of maybe wingers, maybe attacking midfielders, maybe even some strikers to be very high on. But she actually had the joint most goal-creating actions. Just her and Viv Miedema up there, being those creative forces last weekend. Her centre-back partner, Maya Tissier, also stood out for a much more defensive reason. She won 8 of her 10 aerial duels last weekend. It was the game with the most aerial duels, and Manchester United did come away with it, winning more aerial duels than any other team. Letitia won 8 aerial duels, as I said. No other player in the WSL contested more than 7. So even if one of those players, I think there were 3 players that contested 7, even if one of those won every single one, Maya Letitia would still have won more. She was dominant in the air and, yeah, I guess leading on the pitch as you would hope a captain would do. The last little stat I wanted to focus on was around fouls being drawn. So Hayley Rasso drew the most fouls last weekend with 6, but Jade Riviere and Grace Clinton were next behind on 3 each. Don't know how well that will go this weekend because Everton will be, I think, a team that are going to want to sit back against Man United. They're not going to try and take the game to them. Brian Sorensen's very good at doing this with Everton and keeping scorelines down, even if they don't necessarily get a win out of it. They might still be able to salvage a draw against a side that has really got their number. Man United are unbeaten against Everton in the last 11 games. The last win for Everton being a 1-0 win at home in December of 2020, so almost 4 years ago. In fact, the last 3 games between the two sides have finished 16-1 on aggregate to Man United. 16-1. A 15-goal swing in 3 games. That's an average of 5 goals a game that they're winning by. So as I go on to make my prediction for the game, you'll probably be unsurprised to hear that I've got a Man United win and a Man United clean sheet. I think Fallon Toulis-Joyce is going to be keeping her second clean sheet in her second competitive match for the club. Like I said, I think Everton are almost just going to accept the fact they're not going to win, sit back, hope for a draw, or at least, damage limitation. Let's not concede too many. From doing that all game, it's likely that at some point someone's going to make an error. So I don't think Everton are going to be keeping a clean sheet as well. I'm going to go for Everton 0, and then I'm going to go Manchester United 2. I wouldn't be surprised if it was 3, maybe wouldn't even be surprised if it was 4, but I mean, with Turland and Clinton in my fantasy team, I'm hoping it's a lot more, but I think 2-0 is probably about right. Now, the next game is one that's kind of close to my heart, or closest to my heart of any matchup in the WSL, because it's Leicester against Arsenal. Leicester are my closest team, but Arsenal are my team. So these are the 2 teams that probably got the softest spot within my heart. They are, however, 2 teams that aren't likely to have a close game. In the WSL, in the last 6 games, or I think the only 6 games they played against each other in the WSL, it is a 23-2 victory to Arsenal on aggregate. Arsenal have won all 6 of those. And I think it's likely to end up being 7. I think Ruby Mace against her former side isn't going to have the best day. But I'll get to my predictions in a moment once I give you some stats, which obviously is why you're listening to this podcast. So let's start on some of the Leicester parts, because there are actually some positives for them to take away from their game. They only got a point against Liverpool away at the weekend. But to be honest, that's a game where I would have expected Liverpool to win. I'm not surprised it's a draw. I think Liverpool have regressed a little as a squad since last year, and I think Leicester have improved, but it would still have been a game that I would expect Liverpool to win. But like I said, Leicester did come out with some good stats. So Lisa Kopp made the second most saves in the WSL. You can probably guess which team made the most, with Palace conceding 16, I think it was, shots on target. Shea Inez with 12 saves was easily the most, but Lisa Kopp was in second with 5, showing that, she's making a good effort and obviously only conceded 1 goal from the 6 shots on target that she faced. Deanne Rose had a good game. She only came on the 65th minute, but she still managed to get the second most successful take-ons in the league with 4. So like I said, she only played half an hour or so, but when she was on, she was determined and she knew what she was going to do. She was trying to dribble past people. Probably at that stage of the game, that's what you want to do because your opposition's defenders are going to be tired. They're going to not want to be running around a lot. They're going to want you to play through them rather than dribble around. So bringing on someone like Deanne Rose at the end of that game probably wasn't what the Leicester defence wanted to see. And yeah, she did what she needed to do, getting 4 successful take-ons in about half an hour. In a more defensive note, CJ Bott and Janice Cayman, the left and right back, or right and left back with the way that I've said them, they got the 4th most tackles, or joint 4th most tackles in the league with 4 each. And Sophie Howard at centre-back, after being a player who last season absolutely dominated the league in stats like interceptions and clearances, she has started the league with the most clearances, unsurprisingly, with 9. Being that real rock at the back for Leicester and qualming any opposition attacks as and when she can, and stopping those second balls. My favourite stat from last weekend, and one that I did mention in the pod that I recorded on Monday, but I'm gonna mention it again because it's great, was about Yuka Mimiki. So she won the most aerial duels while still having a 100% success rate. She attempted 4 or contested 4 and won all 4. No player managed to match that. Even better when you consider that Yuka Mimiki is 5'0". She is going to be one of the smallest players. Well, must have been one of the smallest players on the pitch. Probably is one of the smallest players in the league, and yet is winning 100% of her aerial duels. And it's not like she's only had 1. She won 4 out of 4. It'd be interesting to see how that continues this weekend. She probably won't keep that up, but Arsenal aren't necessarily known for being strong in the air. Some of the things that Arsenal are good at were some of the stats that came out this weekend. So their probably most impressive one was around Kim Little. So of players with at least 10 attempted passes last weekend, Kim Little has the best pass completion. In fact, she completed all 32 that she attempted, 100%. That is something that can't be matched by anyone. The 100%, never mind the 32 out of 32. I think the next highest with 100% was 7 out of 7. Another thing that I just wanted to highlight from Arsenal was Caldente. She had the most successful passes into the box with 3, and also the highest expected assists with 0.6 in the whole league. In terms of how I think the match is going to go, I think Arsenal are going to dominate the possession. I think they're going to try and move Leicester around and try and find gaps to exploit. They're probably not going to put any or many crosses in because Leicester are generally stronger in the air, especially if they start Sophie Howard. Leicester will probably stop Arsenal scoring this way, so if Arsenal are going to score, it's going to be by playing through Leicester with the ball on the ground. But if Leicester can generate some chances and get some corners, this could be a way that Leicester are going to score. I don't think they're going to have enough opportunities to do that. So my prediction for this game is going to be Leicester 0, Arsenal 2. The penultimate game this weekend is West Ham against Liverpool, seeing Matt Beard and Grace Fisk go back to their old club in West Ham. Last season, this fixture was 1-1, points shared between the two teams. But Liverpool have been unbeaten against West Ham in the last 2 seasons. So it'd be interesting to see if West Ham think that they can buck that trend. They haven't actually won in their last 10 WSL games though, West Ham. So it's not looking positive after especially a 3-0 drubbing against Man United at the weekend. They do have some positives. There's not many of them, but I did find that Katrina Gorry has the second most tackles won in the league after Ashley Neville. And she's also had 100% success in doing so, 5 out of 5. There's not many players that can, or I don't think, apart from Ash Neville, there's not any players that can match that. The other positive I've got from them is Amber Tiziak, who, alongside Sophie Howard, that I mentioned earlier, has the joint most clearances with 9. Liverpool have got a couple more players that got some positive stats about them. Kerry Holland is the one that I want to touch on first, because other than Kiko Saika, she had the most shots on target in the league, or joint most, with 3, which was quite interesting. I think in the game against Leicester, I didn't really think that Liverpool would be getting that many shots on target from their midfielders, but Kerry Holland can prove me wrong. Rachel Laws as well also has the highest progressive pass distance. So her progressive passes in the game against Leicester had a combined 720 metres, which is a lot in one game, that is, listener. Gemma Bonner from centre-back was also creative in her own right. She had the most passes into the final third in the WSL with 9. And Lucy Parry, she's one that I didn't really know what to expect from her this season. I didn't know how much pitch time she'd get and, all that sort of jazz. But she really impressed against Leicester at the weekend. She had the most carries into the penalty area in the league with 2. And she also had the most successful take-ons with 6. I think no one else got more than 4. So she was doing really well in those 1v1 battles and, taking on the Leicester defenders. I'd expect her to be trying to do the same sort of thing this weekend against West Ham, because I don't think West Ham's defence is any better than Leicester's. I don't think they're going to be any better in those 1v1 scenarios. So Lucy Parry, yes, she was against a 35 I think, Yanis Cayman in the last game. Might not be against quite the same age at West Ham, but she's still going to look to be taking on the players. Liverpool, I think, are going to dominate this game, really. Expect them to have a lot more possession, but not necessarily going to create that many chances from it. I think there's going to be a fair bit of playing it around and then trying to, as Liverpool do, cross it in to Sophie Haug, but do the right sort of crosses, because they're going to have a lot of options to do them. They're going to have a lot of opportunities, so they're going to want to make sure they do it at the right times. I think it's going to be a relatively cagey affair. I don't think it's going to be the highest scoring game. I'm going to go for West Ham 0, Liverpool 1. And finally, to round off the weekend, it is what I think is going to be the most exciting and closest game of the weekend. Is Aston Villa hosting Tottenham Hotspur. 2 teams that I thought started very brightly last weekend. Aston Villa obviously didn't win, but they were playing Chelsea and I thought did very well against them. In a very close game, almost matching them. Obviously Chelsea did come out as 1-0 victors, but one of those that on another day I wouldn't be surprised to see that as a draw, or maybe even a Villa win. Spurs, on the other hand, didn't quite have the same level of opposition against them. They thrashed Crystal Palace 4-0, and as much as Palace didn't really put up as good a fight as they'd have wanted to, Spurs really did run away with it. They were excellent. So, this is going to be, I think, the closest game, and I think the most exciting game. Both teams have scored in the last 4 meetings between these sides, and Villa have actually scored in the last 8 matches against us. So I'm definitely expecting both teams to score in this. The match at Villa last season finished 4-2 to Spurs. That was including a Martha Thomas hat-trick. She obviously played at the weekend as well. It was very much in the time last season when this game occurred that Martha Thomas was in her purple patch, scoring, I think, something like 6 goals in the first few games. It'd be interesting to see whether she actually hits the ground running in this season, because she was very quiet after those first few games last year. I think she got 1 goal in the last 10, 15 games, something like that. But there's definitely a player in there, so I wouldn't be surprised to see her getting some more goals. In fact, her and Jess Naz actually were the 2 players with the most XG accumulated last week. Naz got a goal. She only had a couple of shots, but got her goal nicely, albeit literally through Shea Yanez. I think keeper should have done better, but Martha Thomas wasn't so lucky in getting her goal, but she's accumulating that XG. She is a good finisher, so don't expect her to go goalless for too long if she can keep this up. While I'm on the topic of Spurs, I want to mention Drew Spence. She had a fantastic game. I think one of the best games I've seen her play for a long time. In the WSL last week, she had the most key passes with 5, the most progressive passes with 11, and the most shot-creating actions with 7. She was a real creative force going forward through her passing, especially. Interestingly, on this shot-creating actions as well, Amanda Nilden was second. So Spurs are very much dominating that, and you can see that was how they were trying to play last week. Hayley Rasso was probably Spurs' best player. I think if it wasn't for Kiko Saika, Hayley Rasso would have been my player of the week. She had the most shots in the WSL with 6 and the second most shots on target with 3. She also had the most carries into the penalty area, the most progressive passes received, and drew the most fouls, 7, 14 and 6 respectively. In addition to that, she also had the most progressive carries with 11 and had the second most progressive carry distance with 209 metres. So all of those stats just show that on the ball, she was threatening and positive. She was trying to push forward. She was getting the ball. She was trying to get into dangerous positions and get shots away. And that's exactly what she did. I don't think she's going to have that same success against Villa. If she stays on that right wing, she's likely to come up against Paula Tomas, who I thought was potentially Villa's best player last weekend. Between her and Lucy Parker anyway. In fact, Paula Tomas had the 8th most touches in the whole league last weekend and the most in that game with 80. Another Villa player I wanted to touch on a little bit was Sabrina D'Angelo. She obviously she almost scored at the end of the game. But throughout the game anyway, she was really good, especially with her distribution. She actually completed the most long passes of anyone in the league last week with 12. I potentially see that as a type of tactic that Villa will continue to use. If they get pressed high, they're going to look to play those long balls out from the keeper and try and find likely their wingers. It depends who's playing, but maybe a Katie Robinson, maybe a Kenza Darley, those sort of players to be the playmakers and take the play forward. Another player I just wanted to highlight from last weekend that will be playing in this game is Ashley Neville, who those that see my content on social media will know that she is a favourite of mine. I think she's absolute literal class on grass. She won the most tackles in the league last weekend. No other player won more than 5. She won 8. And she only attempted 8 as well. So to win 100% of your tackles and to have attempted that many is very impressive. She also had the second best take-on success rate. So as well as tackling players who are trying to take her on, she is fantastic at taking on players. Now, looking at how I'm going to predict this game is going to go, this is the one that I've found the most difficult because I think there's 2 teams here that are very similar strength. I think if you'd have asked me a few weeks ago, I'd have said it'd be a Villa win comfortably, maybe by a couple of goals. But Spurs really impressed me in that first game, not just because they were against a poor side, but actually I thought they played really well. After losing Grace Clinton and Celine Bazette, it was always going to be interesting to see how they change their play and how successful they can still be. There's also a little bit of an unknown quantity, as there is with any new signing, of exactly how good Hayley Grasso would be. We know she's a good player, and she certainly has hit the ground running, so I don't now have any doubts in her quality. However, I do think Villa is still going to edge this game. It's going to be close. I think both teams are going to get a goal. I wouldn't be surprised to see Spurs win. I also wouldn't be surprised to see it as a draw. But if I'm going to put myself on the spot and say I'm going to pick some sort of scoreline somewhere, I'm going to go for Villa 2, Spurs 1. So there we have it. That is the 6 games that are coming up this weekend. Hopefully you've enjoyed those stats and those numbers, and you can take those with you when you're talking to anyone about the football this weekend or just enjoying it for yourself. Before I go, I did want to just reiterate something that I mentioned on the last pod, which is that the Football Content Awards have nominated or put their nominations out for this year's awards, and some former guests that I've had on the pod have been nominated for Best Creators in Women's Football. So they are not all for the same thing, unfortunately. So if you want to vote for any of them, you're going to have to pick. But Connor Roberts and Laura Howard, who I had on my Arsenal Manchester United preview, they've been nominated for All for Wofo and the work they do. Freya Taylor-Hall, who has been on a couple of podcasts, has been nominated with the Absolute Football podcast, both for Best Creators and for 2 other categories. And then Finley Chung and Jamie Spanger from the Halfway Line, who are on my last preview pod about Spurs and Palace, they've been nominated as well. All of the guests and all of the publications they work for, the podcast, etc., are all fantastic. They all do slightly different things, but they all do wonders for the women's game. They're all brilliant. So a vote for any of them is not a vote wasted. But I would encourage you to go and vote. Voting is open now. Just go to the Football Content Awards website. And I don't know when voting closes, but I believe the awards are being done in November. Other than that, listener, normal sort of things to end the show. Don't forget to join the Fantasy WSL League if you haven't already. You can come and try and beat me. I think there's just shy of 200 of us in the league now. I'm hovering around the top 30 or so, which I'm not too disappointed in. I think that's okay considering how many people are in the league. Obviously, I'll try and get higher as the league goes on. But come and join it, see if you can beat me. I'll put the code to join in the show notes so you can go and copy and paste it into your app and get in from there. If you enjoy the episode and have enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have enjoyed it, do leave a 5-star review. It does help the show grow, and it does help other listeners find the pod and help us to grow. Thank you for joining me today, listener. I hope you've enjoyed the podcast. I hope you've got all the numbers you need. Enjoy the weekend's games, and I will see you next week.